Early 1943. The North African campaign was entering its final and most complex phase. Axis forces, retreating from Libya after the defeat at Second Battle of El Alamein, had fallen back into Tunisia. At the same time, Allied forces who had landed during Operation Torch were advancing eastward. For the first time in the campaign, Axis forces were compressed between two Allied armies. The Desert War was ending, but the fight was not over, and for the SAS, this phase would mark a turning point. The end of the open desert. Tunisia was not Libya. The wide open desert that had allowed deep penetration raids gave way to rocky ridges, mountain passes, narrower supply corridors, heavier troop concentrations. Long-range isolation became harder. Enemy patrol density increased. Rear areas were no longer thinly held expanses of sand. The environment that had allowed the spectacular jeep assaults of 1942 was changing. Continued operations. In early 1943, SAS patrols continued to operate in support of Allied advances. Their missions increasingly included tactical reconnaissance, reporting enemy movement, harassment of retreating columns, limited sabotage operations. However, large-scale airfield destruction raids became less frequent. By this stage, Axis aircraft were operating from more defended and better prepared bases in Tunisia. Aircraft dispersal improved. Security perimeters were reinforced after months of SAS activity in Libya. The enemy had adapted. So with the SAS. The battlefield narrows. The Tunisian campaign became more conventional. Large formations clashed in set-piece battles. American forces engaged Axis troops at places like Kasserine Pass in February 1943. British and Commonwealth forces advanced from the east. Air superiority gradually shifted toward the Allies. For a small special unit like the SAS, the challenge was no longer simply survival in isolation. It was relevance within a tightening front. Logistical and operational strain. By 1943, the SAS had already endured heavy strain. Earlier operations in 1942 had resulted in losses and captures. Vehicle attrition had been constant. Desert warfare punished engines, tires, weapons, and men alike. Supply remained minimal. Even as the front narrowed, SAS patrols still depended on precise navigation, fuel discipline, mechanical self-reliance. There were no large support convoys following behind them. Each patrol operated with autonomy. Shift in strategic role. The Tunisian phase demonstrated something critical. The SAS could not remain a purely desert raiding force. The original concept, small teams destroying aircraft in remote desert airfields, had proven effective, but Europe would not resemble North Africa. Terrain would be denser, enemy forces more concentrated, civilian populations present. Railways, bridges, and infrastructure would replace isolated airstrips as targets. The leadership of the SAS understood this. Reorganization was necessary. Expansion and formalization. During 1943, the SAS began transitioning from an improvised desert unit into a structured special forces regiment. Key developments included expansion of personnel, formalized training structures, clearer integration into British command planning. The experiences of 1941 to 1943 shaped doctrine. Mobility remained central, but methods would diversify. Sabotage techniques were refined, demolitions training expanded, communications improved. Preparation for operations in occupied Europe began. The end of the North African campaign. By May 1943, Axis forces in Tunisia were surrounded.
Supply lines collapsed. Airfields were lost. On 13 May 1943, Axis resistance in North Africa officially ended. More than 250,000 Axis troops surrendered. The North African campaign was over. For the SAS, this was not simply the end of a theater, it was the end of a proving ground. What North Africa had taught. The Desert Campaign had proven several key principles. Small units could inflict disproportionate damage. Speed could replace mass. Surprise could neutralize superior numbers. Autonomy was essential in special operations. The jeep-mounted assault method demonstrated tactical innovation, but even more important was the psychological effect. Axis forces had been forced to defend rear areas constantly. Resources had been diverted. Uncertainty had increased. That was strategic influence. Preparation for Europe. By mid-1943, attention shifted toward the next phase of the war. Allied planners were already preparing for future operations in Europe. The lessons of North Africa would directly influence SAS deployments in occupied France, Italy, and later northwestern Europe in 1944. Future missions would include training resistance fighters, sabotaging rail networks, disrupting communications, attacking supply infrastructure. The transformation from desert raiders to strategic special operators was underway. Organizational development. The SAS, originally a small experimental unit formed in 1941, expanded in 1943. New squadrons were developed. Training became more systematic. Selection remained demanding. Standards remained high, but the unit was no longer an uncertain experiment. It had proven its value. It had survived failure. It had adapted after losses. It had earned institutional trust. Doctrinal legacy. The Tunisian phase reinforced a critical lesson. Special operations must evolve with the battlefield. Rigid doctrine fails. Adaptability sustains survival. In Tunisia, the SAS faced reduced operational depth, improved enemy defenses, and more conventional front lines. Instead of resisting change, they transitioned. That flexibility would define the regiment in later decades. Human cost. The campaign had not been without sacrifice. Some patrols earlier in the war had been lost, some men captured, some killed in action. By 1943, the SAS was smaller than it might have been. Experience came at a cost, but that experience created institutional knowledge, desert navigation skills, improvised mechanical repairs, rapid assault tactics, psychological resilience. These would carry forward. Strategic significance. The SAS did not win North Africa alone. Victory resulted from coordinated land, air, and naval operations, but the contribution of small special units mattered. They amplified pressure. They disrupted patterns. They forced enemy adjustments. In asymmetric ways, they shaped the battlefield. That influence would become central to modern special operations doctrine. Conclusion. Tunisia, 1943. The final chapter of the Desert War. For the Special Air Service, it marked the end of one identity and the beginning of another. No longer just desert raiders, no longer experimental, now a structured, adaptable special operations force. The sands of North Africa had forged the doctrine. The coming battles in Europe would test it, but the transformation had already occurred. From isolated jeep patrols under desert stars to a permanent element of modern warfare. The legend of the SAS had begun in the desert. In 1943, it became an institution.